Hey, second graders, we're ready to start our new chapter book. This one's called Blue in the Face, a story of risk, rhyme, and rebellion by Jerry Swallow. Here's briefly what this story is about. Elsbeth Pule can throw a tantrum the way a pro quarterback can throw a football. In other words, she's very good at it. So when her parents refuse to buy her a pet alpaca, she screams, hollers, and holds her breath until she passes out. When she wakes, she finds herself in a magical kingdom inhabited by characters she only thought she knew. Humpty Dumpty is a 007 type spy. Bo Peep is highly trained in the art of Shaolin stick fighting. And Old King Cole is really Old King Cruel, an evil tyrant who has banished Dumpty, Bo Peep, and their friends to the forest and to a life of poverty and oppression. Self-centered as she is, Elsbeth couldn't care less about their plight. But if she ever wants to see home again, she will have to make a few new friends and show them that sometimes a good old-fashioned tantrum is exactly what's needed. Chapter 1. The following is a partial list of things that fly: airplanes, helicopters, kites, UFOs, birds, excluding emus, penguins, and a few others that just aren't into it, certain squirrels that are very much into it, bees, bats, butterflies, and blimps. The following is a list of additional things that fly at 1840 Wood, Briarwood Place, Suite 207, home of the Pule family. Books, toys, cups, plates, commemorative and otherwise, spoons, forks, small electronic appliances, and shoes. Especially shoes. In fact, there goes one now. "Look out, Dolores!" shouted Sheldon Pule as a wooden-soled clog sailed toward his wife's perfectly groomed cotton candy-like head of hair. As it turns out, being regularly assaulted by flying objects may not be much fun, but it is very good for the upper thighs. Dolores Pule was, as a result, in very sound shape, and she deftly avoided the shoe as it whizzed past her left ear and took out a vase on the mantel. This was not just any vase, it was a cremation urn, housing the powdered remains of Mrs. Pule's mother, Wanda, a woman so mean and nasty that she had put it in writing that upon her death she wished to be cremated and have her ashes scattered over people who had annoyed her. Only the cremation half of her wish had been carried out. The remaining stipulation had not been honored for two reasons. First, there were too many people Wanda had found annoying and not nearly enough remains to go around. Second, her daughter was not nearly so cruel as to go dumping ashes on people. The meanness had apparently skipped a generation and been passed down to Mrs. Pule's 11-year-old shoe-throwing daughter, Elsbeth. Mrs. Pule shrieked at the sight of the urn falling toward the tiled floor below. The vase shattered with a dull crunch, while a small mushroom cloud of Mrs. Pule's mother wafted into the air, partially covering Mr. Comfy, the formerly all-black family cat, an animal that had during Wanda's lifetime annoyed her a great many times. Meanwhile, Elsbeth was reloading. This time she was winding up to hurl one of Mr. Pule's golf clubs like a javelin. Elsbeth despised those golf clubs as much as one person can despise an inanimate object. When her father was not busy working, gallivanting all about the country doing his silly job, he should have been spending time with his daughter, she thought, not chasing a tiny ball around a park full of holes. "No, no," pleaded Sheldon Pule, taking refuge behind an easy chair. "Those clubs are brand new." "I don't care," shouted Elsbeth. Her chubby face, already the shape of a pomegranate, was beginning to resemble one in color as well. The golf club soared across the room, hit the cushioned back of the easy chair, ricocheted off, and knocked a wooden rack holding Mrs. Pule's collection of miniature souvenir spoons off the wall. On its way down, the rack nearly struck Mr. Comfy, who by now was feeling none too comfortable about any of this. The small spoons scattered across the floor with a deafening clang, the one from Mount Rushmore falling precedence first into the heating vent. Elsbeth was happy with the result. She detested those spoons as much as the golf clubs. Each spoon was a special gift to her mother from her father, brought back from his travels. For Elsbeth, he brought tiny soaps and shampoos from all the hotels at which he stayed. While she might have been quite excited to receive them when she was 3, 8 years later, the novelty had worn off. "You told me I could have a pet," Elsbeth wailed. "And now you're going back on your word. How can you even live with yourselves?" This time she picked up the entire bag of golf clubs, raised it over her head, and heaved it onto the coffee table with a racket that resulted in much banging on the ceiling by the young couple living in the apartment below. "We were thinking something like a goldfish," said Mrs. Pewell, "or a parakeet, perhaps." "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard," Elsbeth shot back. "You can't ride a goldfish, and you can't get wool from a parakeet. I want a llama." "Sweetheart," Mr. Pewell reasoned, "we live in an apartment. We can't possibly keep a llama. For starters, where would it sleep?" "I will get bunk beds. He will sleep on the bottom and I on the top." "But what about your night fits?" reminded Mrs. Pewell. Elsbeth's angst often failed to leave her body even while in slumber, and she spent most nights thrashing around in her sleep, which would result in her falling out of bed on a regular basis. Frequently, she woke up with the feeling that she was being watched by some unknown presence. Whether it was a ghost, an intruder, or merely a product of her very active imagination, she could never be certain. "Then I will sleep on the bottom and he will sleep on the top," said Elsbeth. "You can't train a llama to climb a ladder," said Mr. Pewell. "How do you know?" Elsbeth shot back. "Have you ever tried?" Mr. Pewell, forced to admit that indeed he had no experience in the field of llama wrangling, changed his approach. "Even if you could teach a llama to climb a ladder, I'm pretty sure keeping such animals within the city limits is against the law. I'm sorry, but it's just not possible." "Fine," shouted Elsbeth, which in no way should be taken to mean that things were fine. She folded her arms across her chest, drew in a deep breath, and held it, and held it, and held it some more. Then she waited for that look, the one her parents always gave each other just as they were about to cave in to her demands. Her face reddened further, then purpled. Her eyes bulged from their sockets, and then it came. That sweet, wonderful look of concern. Okay. Mr. Pewell was the first to give in. "You can have a llama. We'll just have to find a way to make it work." Elsbeth drew in a deep breath. She smiled and ran to her father. Still a little dizzy from the lack of oxygen, she took a zigzag path getting there. "Thank you, Daddy," she said, falling into his arms. "You're the best father in the whole wide world." Yes," said Mr. Pewell with a nervous chuckle, thinking that perhaps the exact opposite might be true. As Sheldon hugged his daughter, he was looking over her shoulder at Dolores, whose face bore the same look as his own, a look that said, "What have we gotten ourselves into this time?" "My friends at school are going to be so jealous," Elsbeth beamed. This statement was wrong on 2 counts. As you might imagine of a person in possession of such poor manners, Elsbeth had no friends at school. In addition, as of earlier that week, she had no school. She had been suspended for having yet another tantrum in class, which included throwing the globe at her teacher, its raised surface leaving a Greenland-shaped bruise on poor Mrs. Weed's forehead. Elsbeth was told not to return to school until she was ready to apologize to her teacher and to her class for the disruption. In the days following, she had not found herself ready, and in fact had stated that she would never apologize to that ridiculous cow. To make matters worse, if there was anything worse than hitting your teacher in the head with Greenland, this was the 7th school from which Elsbeth had been expelled. In the entire city, there was only one school that had not banned her from admittance, and that was the very prestigious and very expensive private school known as the Waldorf Academy, which was in no way related to that salad with the walnuts in it. It was a school that boasted graduates who had gone on to become Nobel Prize winners, presidents of major corporations, and that guy who made millions by inventing the trap door in the bottom of the toaster to let out all the crumbs. Elsbeth's parents had arranged a meeting on the following Tuesday with the school principal. If he were to find their ill-tempered daughter lacking, the only other option would be homeschooling, and Mr. and Mrs. Pewell were not prepared to subject themselves to such round-the-clock terror. "Okay, dear," said Mrs. Pewell. "It's way past your bedtime, so off you go." "Yes, Mother," cooed Elsbeth, suddenly the most agreeable person on the planet. "And now that I think about it, maybe you're right. Maybe a llama is not the right way to go." Mr. and Mrs. Pewell looked at each other with utter shock and surprise and breathed in a simultaneous sigh of relief. "Oh," said Mr. Pewell, "I'm so glad you've come to your senses, my dear." "Yes," said Elsbeth. "I don't know what I was thinking. After all, why would anyone want a llama for a pet when for the same price you can get an alpaca? Good night now." As Elspeth skipped off to her bedroom, her exhausted parents just stood and watched. Well, I'm glad that worked out, said Mr. Pule, wiping perspiration from his forehead. By the way, what's an alpaca? Not sure, admitted Mrs. Pule, but I'm hoping it's a member of the goldfish family. And with that, she found the broom and dustpan and began the task of sweeping up what remained of her mean, dead mother. There was a little girl who had a little curl right in the middle of her forehead. When she was bad, she was very, very bad. When she was worse, she was horrid.